At 6, Steve Wright, one of the BBC's best-known and longest-serving presenters, has died at the age of 69. He presented programmes on Radio 1 and Radio 2 for more than 40 years. A short time ago, BBC's Sarah Cox broke the news to Radio 2's audience. Good evening. The BBC radio presenter and DJ Steve Wright, who presented programmes for Radio 1 and Radio 2 for more than 4 decades, has died at the age of 69. He was known and loved by millions of people who listened to his daily show Steve Wright in the Afternoon, first broadcast in 1981 on Radio 1 before moving to Radio 2. Tributes have been pouring in from listeners and colleagues since the news was announced an hour ago. The DJ, Tony Blackburn, said he was shocked and described him as a great broadcaster and dear friend. David Sillito looks back at his life.
Friday, 1st of July 2022 and live till 5, it's The Big Show. It's Steve Wright in the Afternoon.
Steve Wright in the Afternoon, a programme that spanned more than 40 years of radio history. It was only just over a year ago that it came to an end, but this afternoon, Radio 2 was the bearer of some sad news.
It's really hard to know what to say about the news of Steve Wright's passing, except we are all absolutely devastated and shocked and blindsided by this news. Steve was an extraordinary broadcaster, a really, really kind person. He was witty, he was warm, and he was a huge, huge part of the Radio 2 family.
And among those paying tribute, Tony Blackburn, saying, "I am so sad that my dear friend Steve Wright has passed away. He was a great broadcaster and we just loved one another's company. I was shocked at the news and will miss him." And the BBC's Director General, Tim Davie, said, "No one had more energy to deliver shows that put a smile on audiences' faces. They loved him deeply. We are thinking of Steve and his family and will miss him terribly."
Steve Wright, 94 to 90.
His sound, which he developed in the 80s, was a highly produced mix of comedy characters and a whooping, applauding, cheery, chatty posse.
And the bride is 107.
I think it was just because it was something different. It was slightly subversive. There's a little bit of satire in there. And it wasn't like, there you go, that's the great sound of.
Steve Wright.
Known as Zoo format radio, it was at its peak reaching 7 million listeners a day.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to Top of the Pops.
On TV, he presented Top of the Pops and in the 90s, the Steve Wright People's Show. But his real home and where he shone was always the wireless. Steve Wright, professional, slick, funny, a master of the art of radio.
Well, David is with me now. This is going to come as a huge shock to a lot of people, isn't it? Because, I mean, he had legions of loyal fans, people who grew up with him.
40 years of driving in the car, and he was part of your afternoons, part of my afternoon. And, as you say, a complete shock. His last programme was only this Sunday, his Sunday Love Songs. His final words, "I'll be here next week." So this will shock many, many people. And the reason we're talking about Steve Wright in this way is what he was in radio. I mean, if you look back at his history, he started back in the 70s, and he started in the Grams Library, which is just over there, the gramophone library of the BBC. I mean, he lived and breathed it throughout his entire life. 210 Radio, Thames Valley, Radio Luxembourg. This was his life. And the inspiration, Kenny Everett, American Zoo format radio, he really did change the landscape of British radio and what it sounded like. And if you think back to it, always funny, zany, and incredibly slick. And if you understand anything about what goes into making a radio programme like that, you realise what a master he was of it.
David Sillito, thank you.
Radio DJs, past and present, have been remembering the humour, the talent and the sheer creative energy of Steve Wright following his shock death at the age of 69. He joined BBC Radio in 1980 and presented there for more than 40 years with millions of loyal listeners. He was presenting programmes as recently as Sunday and was awarded an MBE in the New Year's Honours for his radio work. Garrett Vincent looks back at his career.
Hello there,
good evening. I'm Steve Wright. Welcome to Top of the Pops. We have an excited crowd.
Back in the day when Top of the Pops was a central viewing for music fans hoping to catch a glimpse of their favourite act, Steve Wright was one of the DJs who guided us through the charts every week.
Dance right now to David Bowie and Queen at #1 with Under Pressure.
Hello, good morning.
But it was, of course, on the radio that Steve Wright became part of everyday life. As the working day rolled past lunchtime, it was so often his voice that was on in the background. Steve Wright in the afternoon was a mainstay of music radio on the BBC for decades. He wanted his listeners to feel part of the gang, and his easygoing, friendly approach to broadcasting drew in millions of them.
He was a one-off. He was one of those great one-offs like Kenny Everett or Terry Wogan. And when they're gone, they don't come back again. We only hope that they have inspired vocations in younger people to be as unique, as daring, as brave as he was.
Inspire, he certainly did. A new generation of broadcasters, one of whom spoke of her sense of loss on air today.
Steve was an extraordinary broadcaster, a really, really kind person. He was witty, he was warm, and he was a huge, huge part of the Radio 2 family. And I know my fellow DJs will all be absolutely shattered too. And I imagine you're feeling sad too.
Radio 2 has announced plans to celebrate his life with a range of special programming. The station's boss said tonight that Steve Wright understood the connection and companionship that radio engenders better than anyone, and we all loved him for it.